At 26,000 feet, the air is too thin to support human logic. They call it the death zone, a place where your brain literally begins to swell, your vision fractures into 1,000 pieces, and the cold turns your blood into slush. For world-class climber Leo, a sudden white otter has turned his summit triumph into a nightmare. He's suffering from high-altitude pulmonary edema. He can't see the trail, he can't feel his hands, and his oxygen tank just hissed its final breath. He is standing on a ledge the size of a dinner plate, waiting for the mountain to claim him. The ghost of the North Face, the dog who guided a blind descent. Chapter 1: The Death Zone. At 26,000 feet, the laws of biology are rewritten by the cold and the vacuum. This is the death zone, a place where the human body is no longer capable of regenerating, it is merely dying at a slower or faster rate depending on the person's grit. The air is so thin that the brain begins to starve for oxygen, causing the capillaries to leak fluid. This is high-altitude cerebral edema, and for world-class climber Leo, it was turning his summit victory into a slow-motion execution. Leo had reached the peak of K2 just as the sun began to dip, a moment of triumph that lasted only seconds before the horizon vanished. A black blizzard had swept up the North Face with the speed of a freight train, dropping the visibility to zero and the temperature to a bone-cracking -40. In the thin air, Leo's smartwatch began to pulse red, signaling that his blood oxygen had dropped to 60%. He tried to reach for his spare oxygen canister, but his fingers, encased in triple-layered down mitts, felt like frozen sausages. The simple act of turning a valve became an impossible feat of engineering. As the hypoxia set in, Leo's vision began to fracture. The white world of the mountain didn't look like snow anymore, it looked like a kaleidoscope of shifting geometric shapes and neon colors. This is the summit-drunk state, a lethal euphoria that makes climbers feel warm and invincible right before they lie down to sleep forever. Leo found himself leaning against a jagged outcrop of rock, his mind drifting away from the mountain. He began to think about his childhood home in the valley, the smell of fresh bread, and the warmth of a fireplace. He was losing his grip on reality. The storm roared around him, a physical wall of ice and wind that tried to peel him off the ledge. He was standing on a shelf of rock no wider than a dinner plate, with a 3,000-foot drop into the abyss on his left. One stumble, one misplaced step in his dazed state, and he would become a permanent part of the mountain's Rainbow Valley, where the bodies of fallen climbers remain forever. His oxygen tank let out a final, mournful hiss as the last of the life-giving gas escaped into the storm. Leo felt a sudden, crushing weight in his chest. His lungs were filling with fluid, and every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. He collapsed to his knees, his forehead resting against the ice. He was a world-class athlete reduced to a shivering animal, waiting for the mountain to claim its tax. He closed his eyes, prepared for the long sleep. He didn't hear the wind anymore, he only heard the rhythmic, heavy thud of his own heart slowing down. He was at the end of his rope, both literally and figuratively. He was a statistic in the making, another name to be added to the long list of those who reached the top but never found their way back down. But then, through the roar of the blizzard, a new sound emerged. It wasn't the scream of the wind or the groan of shifting ice. It was a deep, guttural huff, the sound of a heavy creature moving through the powder. Leo's dying brain dismissed it as a final hallucination, a mountain spirit coming to escort him to the other side. But this spirit had a heartbeat, and it was getting closer. Chapter 2: The Invisible Map. Khyber was a legendary figure at the Namche Monastery, a 140-pound Tibetan Mastiff mix with a coat as thick as a nomadic rug and eyes the color of ancient amber. He had spent his life watching the tall ones arrive with their colorful gear and their loud machines, only to watch many of them vanish into the clouds. He was the silent observer of the peaks, a creature that belonged to the stone and the sky. He had formed a strange, silent bond with Leo over the weeks of acclimatization. While other climbers ignored the monastery stray, Leo had shared his expensive jerky and spoken to Khyber in the quiet, pre-dawn hours. Khyber didn't care about summits or records, but he understood the frequency of the pack. When the storm hit the peak, Khyber felt the disturbance in the air miles below. While the professional rescue teams at base camp checked their barometers and shook their heads, Khyber began to climb. He didn't need crampons, and he didn't need oxygen. His paws were equipped with natural ice grips, and his lungs had been forged by 1,000 generations of high-altitude living. He moved through the bottleneck, the deadliest part of the climb, with the ease of a shadow. Khyber didn't navigate by sight. The blizzard was as thick as milk, hiding the trail from even the most experienced guides. Instead, the dog navigated by the vibration of the stone. He could feel the hollow echoes of hidden crevasses through his pads, and he could smell the ozone that preceded a lightning strike. He was a living GPS, tracking a scent that was being erased by the wind. He reached the 26,000-foot mark in record time, his massive chest heaving but his resolve unbroken. He found Leo slumped against the rock, nearly buried by the accumulating snow. The man was a blue statue, his skin the color of the ice he was resting on. Khyber didn't bark immediately. He walked up to Leo and shoved his massive, warm muzzle directly into the man's neck. The shock of the heat was like a lightning bolt to Leo's system. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open to see a prehistoric beast standing over him. To a man suffering from cerebral edema, Khyber looked like a lion from a myth, his fur covered in a thick crust of rime ice. Leo reached out a shaking hand, his fingers disappearing into the dog's dense, warm mane. Khyber let out a low, chest-shaking growl. It wasn't a threat, it was a wake-up call. He grabbed the sleeve of Leo's down parka and gave a violent tug, pulling the man's torso away from the rock. He knew that the rock was a heat sink, pulling the last of Leo's life force into the mountain. He was forcing the man to move, to fight, to reconnect with the world of the living. The dog stood over Leo, blocking the wind with his massive frame. For a moment, the death zone felt less like a tomb and more like a den. Khyber was the anchor. The only solid thing in a world that was turning to white light. He began to lick the frost from Leo's goggles, his warm tongue acting as a de-icer, trying to clear the man's path to the future. Chapter 3: The Hallucination. Leo's brain was still fractured by the lack of oxygen. As he looked at Khyber, the dog's face seemed to shift and morph. One moment he was a wolf, the next a golden lion, and then a monk in a brown robe. "Am I dead?" Leo whispered, the words freezing as they left his lips. He began to feel a strange, warm glow in his limbs, the paradoxical heat that leads victims to strip off their clothes right before they freeze. He reached for the zipper of his parka, his mind convinced he was back in a summer meadow. "So hot," he muttered, his fingers fumbling with the heavy plastic teeth. This is the moment most climbers die, they discard their only protection and surrender to the ice. But Khyber knew the signs of the heat trick. He lunged forward, pinning Leo's arms to his sides with the weight of his massive head. The dog began to bark, not a normal bark, but a sovereign roar that vibrated through Leo's chest cavity. The sound was so loud it cut through the hallucinations, forcing Leo's synapses to fire. It was a sensory reset, a physical jolt that brought the man back to the terrifying reality of the ledge. The meadow vanished, replaced by the screaming white void of the north face. Leo realized he was holding his zipper open. He saw the dog's amber eyes, fixed on him with a fierce, demanding intelligence. You're real," Leo gasped, his hands trembling as he zipped the parka back up to his chin. The dog leaned his weight against Leo, a 140-pound thermal blanket that was donating its core heat to keep the man's organs from shutting down. The storm reached its peak, the wind speed hitting 80 miles per hour. Pebbles of ice were being shot like bullets against Leo's suit, but Khyber didn't flinch. He tucked his tail and lowered his center of gravity, becoming a living breakwater. He stayed there for 2 hours, his fur becoming a solid wall of ice, acting as a shield for the man who had once shared his jerky. In the silence between the gusts, Leo could hear Khyber's heart. It was a slow, powerful rhythm, the heartbeat of the mountain itself. It was the only thing keeping Leo's own heart from stopping. He realized that the dog wasn't just waiting for the storm to pass, he was waiting for Leo to find the will to live. Khyber was the guardian of the threshold. As the oxygen starvation continued, Leo's vision finally failed completely. The glare of the snow and the internal pressure on his optic nerves caused snow blindness. He was now at the top of the world's most dangerous mountain, in the middle of a blizzard, and he was blind. He was a dead man walking, except for the fact that he was no longer walking alone. He reached out and found Khyber's heavy leather collar. "I can't see, boy," Leo sobbed, the tears freezing instantly on his cheeks. "I can't see the way down." Khyber didn't whine. He stood up, his muscles tensing under his thick coat. He moved to the front of the ledge and gave a sharp, authoritative tug on Leo's sleeve. The blind descent was about to begin. Chapter 4: The Anchor. The descent from 26,000 feet is a technical nightmare even with full vision and a team of Sherpas. For a blind, hypoxic man and a dog, it should have been impossible. But Khyber didn't navigate by landmarks, he navigated by the architecture of the ice. He could tell by the sound of his own paws whether he was standing on solid rock or a snow bridge over a bottomless crevasse. Leo gripped Khyber's harness with a death grip, his life literally hanging on a few inches of nylon and a dog's intuition. Khyber moved with a surgical precision, taking small, deliberate steps. He would stop at every ledge, testing the edge with his weight before allowing Leo to move forward. He was acting as a living anchor, his 4-point contact with the ice giving them a stability no human could match. Every time Leo stumbled, and he stumbled often, Khyber would brace himself, his powerful legs locking into the snow to keep Leo from sliding over the edge. He was a biological brake system, a mountain-tuned machine that was countering the gravity of the abyss. They moved in a slow, agonizing dance, a man and a beast tethered by a single rope and 1,000 years of loyalty. The bottleneck loomed ahead, a narrow traverse beneath a giant, unstable ice cliff known as a serac. One loud noise or one shift in the wind could bring tons of ice crashing down on them. Khyber stopped. He lowered his head and began to move in a low, silent crawl, signaling Leo to do the same. They moved through the danger zone in total silence, the only sound the rasping breath of the man and the soft padding of the dog. As they cleared the bottleneck, the air began to thicken, only slightly, but enough to give Leo's brain a flickering spark of clarity. He could feel the pressure in his head receding, but the blindness remained. He was entirely dependent on the tugs and nudges of the dog. Khyber was his eyes, his balance, and his courage. At one point, Leo's leg simply gave out. He collapsed into the snow, his spirit finally broken by the sheer physical toll of the descent. "Just leave me, Khyber," he whispered into the dog's fur. "Go back to the monastery. Save yourself." But Khyber didn't go. He began to dig at Leo's side, his paws throwing snow onto the man's face until Leo was forced to stand up just to make him stop. The dog wouldn't allow him the dignity of a quiet death. He was a relentless taskmaster, pushing and prodding Leo through the dark. He knew that if they stopped moving for more than 5 minutes, the cold would lock their joints forever. Khyber was the engine that was driving them toward the light, a fur-covered force of nature that refused to accept a no. They reached 23,000 feet, the site of Camp 4. The storm had begun to break, the moon emerging through the clouds like a cold, silver eye. Leo still couldn't see, but he could hear the sound of human voices in the distance. He felt Khyber's pace quicken, the dog letting out a triumphant, echoing bark that signaled their arrival to the world of the living. Chapter 5: The Blind Descent. The climbers at Camp 4 were huddled in their tents, prepared for a night of mourning. They had seen Leo's lights vanish hours ago, and they knew the statistics of the North Face. But then, they heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in the death zone. It was the bark of a dog, a deep, resonant sound that cut through the thinning wind like a bell. They unzipped their tents and shone their headlamps into the dark. What they saw would become a legend in the mountaineering community. Emerging from the white mist was Leo, his suit shredded and his face covered in a mask of ice. He was walking with his hand buried in the manet of a massive Tibetan mastiff that looked like it had been carved out of the glacier itself. "Leo? Is that you?" someone shouted. Leo didn't answer, he just kept moving, his blind eyes staring at nothing, his feet following the precise path the dog was setting. The rescue team rushed forward to grab him, but Khyber stood his ground, a low growl vibrating in his throat until he was sure the tall ones were there to help, not to hurt. The medics immediately put Leo on high-flow oxygen and began the rapid rewarm process. His core temperature was dangerously low, and his vision was still a blur of grey and white. But through the haze of the oxygen mask, Leo reached out his hand, searching for the dog. He didn't want the doctors, he wanted the anchor. Khyber sat by the side of the medical tent, his work finally done. He allowed the other climbers to bring him bowls of water and high-calorie meat, but his eyes never left the tent where Leo lay. He was a ghost of the North Face, a creature that had crossed the threshold of death and brought back a soul. The climbers looked at the dog with a sense of religious awe. For the next 12 hours, Khyber stayed at the entrance of the tent, a silent sentinel in the snow. He didn't sleep, and he didn't seek warmth. He was waiting for that alpha to be stable. The story of his climb began to spread through the radio waves to the base camp below, then to the world. A stray dog had outperformed the most advanced search and rescue technology on the planet. Leo's vision began to return as the pressure in his brain subsided. The first thing he saw wasn't the sterile white of the tent or the faces of his friends. It was the massive, frost-tipped head of Khyber peering through the flap. The dog's amber eyes met his, and for a moment, the mountain was silent. Leo realized that he hadn't climbed K2 alone, he had been carried by a friend. The descent to base camp was a victory lap. Leo was carried on a litter, but Khyber walked at his side the entire way. Every climber they passed stepped aside in respect. They knew that they were looking at a living miracle, the only dog in history to summit the death zone and return with his pack intact. Instinct is higher than any summit. We spend our lives trying to conquer nature with our tools and our technology, but in the end, it is the simple, raw loyalty of a dog that saves us. We are defined not by the mountains we climb, but by the hearts we carry with us through the storm. Khyber's fur is graying now, his gait a little slower on the monastery steps. But when the wind blows from the north face, he still lifts his head and sniffs the air. He is still listening for the vibration of the stone, still ready to answer the call of a friend in the clouds. He is the spirit of the Himalayas, the dog who walked into the light and brought back a brother. As the sun sets over the peaks tonight, think of the Khybers in your own life. Think of the ones who see you when you are blind, and the ones who pull you back when you are falling. We are all climbers on some mountain, and we all need a guardian in the shadows. We tell this story so that the ghosts of the North Face are never forgotten, and so that we remember to trust the heart when the eyes can no longer see. The mountain takes what it wants, but love never lets go. If Khyber's climb into the clouds moved your soul, help us honor the guardians of the peaks. Smash that like button to salute Khyber and every animal that hears the call we ignore. Subscribe to Paws That Saved Lives, where we bring you the most thrilling and dramatic cinematic legends of nature's heroes. Comment Khyber below if you believe a dog's instinct is higher than any summit.